No, that's not built into Android Studio. You need to use custom software for that, unfortunately. But it doesn't limit what I want to show you today. All right. Now, with the iOS training course I did a couple of weeks ago, we talked about views being a key kind of screen within the app. And the equivalent in Android is activities. So you have an activity, which is essentially a screen within your app. And we've got a lot of default activities built in here. So we've got, you can see just a fairly simple one there. We've got a completely empty one here. Then we can go full screen. We can add an advert. We can use Google Maps. We can have a nice default login look, etc., etc. So you can choose any of these dependent on what you want to make, but we're going to keep things very simple and just use an empty activity. So this will start us off with essentially an empty screen with just a menu bar at the top. So next again, and we can choose a name for this activity. I'm just going to call it main activity, but you might want to call it login activity or homepage activity or whatever if you were going to have a number of different activities within your app. And then I would let those be the default as well. All right, so then that will create the app. It does take a little while it's going. I'll check questions again. Nope, okay. All looking good so far in that case. You'll notice that Android Studio isn't quite as stylish and nice to look at as Xcode, but on the upside it is rather more stable. I've definitely found that Xcode crashes and is a little inconsistent, whereas Android Studio, in my experience at least, is a bit more solid. Whether that makes up for having to deal with a fairly ugly interface is up to you. So then when you open up the app, I'd recommend clicking Project here, and that brings out the project view on the left there. So let's have a quick look through what we've got on the screen. It's a bit simpler than what we were just looking at. Obviously, across the top, we've got our menu bar, which has got a lot of settings that generally you're not going to need to worry about, but we're definitely going to be using things like run app and a bit of copy and paste, and that's all we really need most of the time. Then we've got the file options over here, and again, cut, copy, paste, etc. And the main button here that we're going to be using, which is run the app. We'll be doing that in a minute. And then there's some specific Android options here, which we're not going to be talking about today. But they are covered in the course, incidentally, and that's worth mentioning as well. Carrie can get you the login for the complete Android developer course. And if you want to know if something is covered in that course, then please do ask, and I'll let you know. And then here we've got our location of the app. So the app, just again, like in iOS, is built up of folders and files. So this is the app folder. It has a first folder called manifests, which essentially just contains some data about the app. This is a format called XML, which is a little bit like HTML, but it's a way of storing data in a text file. And although it's tricky to write, you can probably read most of this as what's going on. We've got the version number. We've got the app name. So that's the company name followed by the app name. And then we've got some various options. So the icon, allow backups, the title, and a few other bits and bobs, the theme, etc. So we edit that on some occasions, but most of the time we won't have anything to do with it, and we can leave it to the defaults. The most interesting folder for us, I think, is the Java folder, particularly the first folder within that, and this contains the mainActivity.java file. So if you haven't worked with Android apps at all before, then Java is the language that you'll be working with. And mainActivity.java is the code which connects to our main activity, which is our only screen of our app so far, because we've only got one. Now, we'll be looking into this in much more detail a little bit later on, but for now, just be aware that that's the code that we're going to write our app in. And then we're going to go down to res, which is short for resources, and that's where we would store things like images or any videos or any particular data that we wanted to store and access in our app which isn't code. Specifically, we'll be looking at the drawable folder because that's where we're going to be adding images to our app. The other very important file, though, that we're going to be working with a lot is inside the layout folder, and that's activity_main.xml. And this is our layout. So comparing it once again to iOS, if you were here on my webinar a few weeks ago, then the main activity is much like the Swift file, which controls the view controller. And then activity main is much like the storyboard, which allows you to work with the look and layout of the app. And much like Xcode as well, we allow a drag and drop setup to here. So this is what we'll be doing in a moment. We'll be dragging and dropping layouts, widgets, and other things into our app, which is pretty easy to do. And finally, I'll just mention down here, we've got a thing called Gradle scripts. We're definitely not going to be editing any of these today, but if you get into advanced Android development, then you can edit your Gradle scripts, which control other bits of code that you can grab into your app and allow for plugins and extra features and that kind of thing, or change the versions of APIs and SDKs which are included within the build of your app. But for now, you can consider that something that you don't need to look at and just close it up. It's a little bit terrifying as well. And if you edit it, you can stop your app from working completely. So I'd leave that until you really need to get into it. Okay, so now on our activity main, we've obviously got the layouts, widgets, text fields, containers, etc. So things that we can drag onto our app, and we'll be dragging those on in a minute. And then around here, we've just got some options that we can zoom in and out and that kind of thing. And we can also choose the device that we view our app on. And that's one thing to really bear in mind with Android, that you're developing for a huge range of screen sizes and power of devices. So you need to be a little bit more careful than you do with iOS development to make sure that your app looks good on a variety of different screen sizes. And then over here, we've got the component tree, which again is very similar to the equivalent in iOS. And at the moment, we've just got a device screen. We've got a relative layout within that screen, and then we've got a text view within that relative layout, which has the text "Hello World" in it. So that's all the things on our component tree. And then we've got a context menu down here at the bottom right, which, depending on what component we'll have selected, we can change various things about that component. So we can change the width, the height, margin, colors, all sorts of things using the settings down there. All right, so that's how the layout looks. It's worth just quickly noticing that as well as doing drag and drop into our layout, we can click text here, and this is the XML code that defines our layout. So if you want to be really precise and drag and drop isn't your style, then you can write code instead. So as you're developing, you might want to do something like drag something in and then have a look at the code and see what effect that dragging in has had. And then you can build up layouts by writing code rather than dragging and dropping, if that's your sort of thing. All right, so that's our sort of overview of Android Studio itself. I'll just check for questions at this point. Nope, we're all good. Excellent. So this is how Android Studio works. The main thing that we then want to be able to do is run our app. And we can do that just like in iOS in the emulator. So I've got one up and running already because they are a little bit slow to get going. But I will show you the process of setting up an emulator. So you just click Launch Emulator, and then if you haven't run Android Studio before, you probably won't have any emulators here. So you'd click the ... and then you are able to create a virtual device. And you can see quite excitingly, you can pretty much choose any type of Nexus phone or a variety of kind of generic phones of various size there. And you can choose tablets and Android Wear devices and Android TV devices as well. So I'm going to go for most of the default options. Click Next. And then you can choose the API levels. If you want to choose some API levels which you haven't downloaded yet, you just click that option, and then you can download Marshmallow or Lollipop or any of the earlier versions of Android as well. But I'm just going to stick with my Lollipop versions for now. So let's go for API level 22 and then next. So I'll call it my new phone so that I know what I'm dealing with. And once again, we can choose orientation, certain scale, in case it's too big or too small on your computer screen. And then all the other options I'd leave as they are. And then we'll finish, and then it will set up the AVD or Android Virtual Device for us, and we'll be able to run our app on it. So that's the process of setting up a virtual device. I'm going to actually run it on my existing one though, because it does take about 5 minutes to set up. At least it does on my computer. So I definitely recommend setting up your virtual device in plenty of time so you're not waiting for it. Nice. Incidentally, this is the app that we're going to be making. I suspect we'll get about halfway through it today. We'll see how things go. And the idea is that we can convert from dollars. So if we have an amount in dollars, say £30 or $30, sorry, then we could convert it to pounds and get roughly 19.5 popping up there. So that's the basic app that we're going to have, which is going to have just a basic image in it, a bit of text field, and a bit of a response as well. And here we go. So here's my first Android app, and you can see, let me just plug myself in. You can see we've got the Hello World text field there, and the title at the top, and nothing else. So very, very simple. Don't worry about the rendering problems there. We've now got this even more ugly log levels at the bottom, which is something you can probably ignore, or hopefully, until you start getting errors in your app. So quite often it's worth just switching that over to an error log, and then there'll always be some errors with the emulator, but it's really you're interested in things that crash your app or make your app not behave as you would hope it would. So most of the time when we're not running and debugging our app, we'll get rid of that and then be working here. Okay, so now we've got our app up and running. We're going to start adding elements to it. So we've got our text view, and we're going to start adding some different elements and seeing how they all work. So again, I'll just have a quick check. Nope, we're good with questions. Do feel free to ask questions. I do enjoy a bit of interaction. Otherwise, it makes me feel like I'm talking to myself. Okay, so let's have a look then. I'll just switch this back to a Nexus 5. We do seem to have lost our text view, interestingly. I'll just zoom us out. Interesting. Okay, well, we'll try adding things and see what happens. So up at the very top, we'll now go through the things that we can add to our app. And the first list is layouts. We're not going to have too much to do with those in this webinar. They're covered in some detail in the course, but you can more or less imagine what they are. They're ways of laying out specific items. So we've got a relative layout, which allows us to lay out text views and other things relative to each other. So I can have something on the right of something else or below or above something else. But that's not necessarily how we would want to set everything out. So a grid view is often quite useful, a grid layout, which allows you to lay out things in a grid, or a table layout, which is kind of one row above another, or a linear layout where you've got those columns there, or a vertical linear layout where you've got rows. So those different layouts are good for different types of apps, but we're not going to be going much down that route today. So let's try adding another text view. And there's something strange has seemingly happened with my app there. It's all looking a little bit strange. See if I can undo any changes that I've made. Okay. That's a little unfortunate. What I might do is just quickly see if I can switch to another project here. Here we go. I'm going to cheat and switch to the one I was working with earlier. If anyone knows what happened to my title bar there, please do let me know. I think I must have opted for a setting or something. But anyway, so here we are back to our standard app layout. So first off, if we want to change the content of our text view, it's very simple. We just double click on it, and then we can change both the text itself and the ID. And the ID is very important because it's going to allow us to refer to that thing in our code later on. But right now, we don't really care about the ID. But I can change the text to whatever I want. And let's then zoom in a little bit more. There we go. And then let's have a look at some of the properties that we can set for text views as well. So we've got width and height, fairly obvious. They're not going to change very much here because the text view is going to be of a fixed font size anyway. So if I change the width and the height, which I can do by dragging, then it doesn't actually change anything there. To do that, I'd have to change the text size. So I can actually do that down here. Here we go. So text size, and then I have a few options. I can either type in the text size directly. So I could put something like 50 dp, which would make it 50 pixels high. Or I could click on the three dots there and choose some of the standard text sizes within the theme that I'm using. So I could choose headline, which is 24 SPs, or any of those options there. And the advantage of choosing these is that then if I update the theme, then that will update all of the text sizes that have that value. Whereas if I just set it manually, then I have to update them myself. So I can change the text size there. A few other things. So text color is fairly obvious. Again, probably the easiest thing is to click on the three dots box, and then again I can choose a number of standard colors from the theme that I'm using. These are the HTML codes of those colors. Or I can choose some system colors, or I can just pick my own color from this color picker. So if I want to go for some sort of darkish green, then that will change the text color. And I think you probably get the idea that all of these settings are useful when we're doing precise layouts, but right now they're not particularly interesting. So the only one I'll mention separately is the alpha, which we did see in the iOS course as well. I do like alpha because it allows things to be rather transparent. So if I set the alpha to be 0.5, for example, then that will make it slightly faded. And if there was an image or something behind that, we would be able to see some of the image through that. And an alpha of 0 is invisible. And then as we increase the alpha, it becomes slightly more visible. It's a great way of putting elements in front of other elements and being able to see things through them. So 0.9 is almost completely opaque, and then 1 is completely opaque. All right, so that's text views. So that's pretty much everything that you'd want to change about a text view at this point. If there's anything else, let me know. Okay. The text was issued structured on Android too. Did we have that in iOS as well? Maybe we did. Maybe it's me and my webinars. I'm cursed in some way. I will look it up and see if I can figure out what it was for webinar number 2. But we seem to be carrying on not too badly. In iOS, we need to link labels from the main storyboard to the view controller. Do we have to link in Android? Aha, yes, good question. We'll definitely see that once we've added a couple more widgets, and I'll show you how to link. Yes, we do need to link is the short answer, but we do it in a slightly different way. We don't do this control dragging that we had before. Essentially, we do it through this ID here. So we set the ID here, and then we refer to that ID in our main activity file. We'll do that in a few moments. Perhaps the running emulator is not allowed. Yeah, no, that shouldn't be it. I've definitely edited apps that have been running in the emulator before. But when we have access to the course material, and good question, Carrie has got the coupon codes. I gave them to him today, so he should be able to email those out, I suspect, after the webinar. If you contact him, I'm sure he'll let you know when you'll be getting those. All right, so let's carry on. I'll speed up a little bit now that we've got the idea. So buttons, I can drag in a button, and you can see because we've got this relative layout here, as I drag it around, it's giving me the options that I can have it below, or below and to the right, or to the right of and below, to the right of and align the bottom, etc. So Android, I think, has got a really good layout system. I actually prefer it to the iOS system, and it's much more robust, I think, when you're dealing with a number of different screen sizes. So I can have it relative to that first label, or I could just make it, say, centered in the middle of the app with center horizontal and center vertical, like that. And then that's my button. And similarly, I can style it in the same way. So I could change the background color. Let's have some horrendous sort of yellowy color. And I can change the font. And if I double click, then I can change the text as well, etc. So that's buttons. We've got all the usual things that we're used to. So checkboxes, just like that. And switches, I'll just bring in a few so that we can try them out in the emulator. And image views. So image views, just like in Android, by default don't come with an image. So let's get ourselves an image and add it to the image view. While we're doing that, we'll just run the app that we've got so we can just play around and see how the buttons work. So to add an image to the app, we'll just start off by downloading an image. What would you like to add an image of? Someone tell me an image they'd like to use. Puppies, wonderful. Good choice. Wonderful. Come on, Google. There we go. A lot of puppies. So maybe I'll just take that version. So save image as. And I'm going to save it initially on the desktop. There. And there's actually a little bit of a bug in the OS X version of Android Studio, where on the Windows version, you can just take your image and drag it into the drawable folder. But for some reason, that doesn't work on the OS X version. So you need to have a bit of a workaround. And that workaround is to control click on the drawable folder. If you're in Windows, you could right click and then reveal in Finder. And then you get the res folder appearing in Finder. And then just double click on the drawable folder, and then I'll drag the puppy's image into the drawable folder like that. And now we should see it right there. There it is. Excellent. So now we want to link this drawable image with our image view. Oh, it looks like our app has run. Let's have a quick look. There we go. So we've got our nice big image there, and we can click our button, we can click our checkbox, got a nice animation there, and we can play with our switch as well. All right, so we'll make those properly interactive a bit later on. But the image view, the main thing we want to change here is the src, or the source. There we go. And I should just be able to enter download.jpg. Oh, no, it's not a fan of download.jpg. Oh, let's select it instead. So I'll click on the box and then click on projects. And it's usually down at the bottom of project. Where is it? There it is. Lovely. Okay, wonderful. So now we've got our puppies image, and of course we can kind of scale that a bit and drag it around and position it differently as well. All right, so that's pretty much the basics of adding various elements to your Android app. Any questions about that before we go on and look at how we connect that to some code? Thank you, Ivan. Yeah, it was not only missing the JPEG, but also the drawable part. So yeah, you don't actually need the JPEG bit, but you do need to state that it's in the drawable folder. Okay, right, so time to do some code. And what I'll do for the moment is I'll make this click me button interactive. So I'll just bring it over here. So we want to do something when that click me button is clicked. So the first thing we need to do is set it to have an ID. So it's got a default ID of button. I'm just going to change that to click me button. And I'll say yes, just in case it's referred to somewhere in our document. So that button now has a specific ID, and that ID is important because it's going to allow me to refer to it in the code. All right, so jumping over to main activity then. Let's have a quick analysis of what's going on. We've got a package name, so pretty simple at the top there. And then we've got various frameworks here which are being imported. And what happens here is that Android tries to be efficient and only import the code for the things that we're actually using. So if we're not using GPS, for example, then it won't import the code for GPS. And this just enables apps to be a bit more efficient. But as soon as we start writing code which involves, say, GPS or buttons or whatever it is, then it will start importing the code that we need. But that can be an issue if you're trying to use a method which isn't covered up here, then you'll have problems. So you'll need to remember to import the necessary frameworks, but it normally does it automatically for you. So those are the frameworks that we're using at the moment. And then we've got this chunk of code here. I won't go into too much detail about public. Public essentially means it can be accessed from anywhere within the app. And then a class, we talked about classes back in iOS. Essentially, a class is a collection of functions or methods, as they're known, so chunks of code, and also variables, which usually can only be accessed within that particular chunk of code, but within that class, but sometimes can be extendable to other classes as well. And this is a default class called main activity, which is connected to the activity main.xml screen. And here we've got extends action bar activity. Now extends means that the main activity class is going to take all of the code from action bar activity and then add some more to it. So action bar activity is the default activity that we've set up. So it was essentially the empty one, but it does have an action bar at the top. So action bar activity is the default code that sets up this screen that we've got here with the action bar at the top. and then we're extending that by adding our own code to it. And then we're adding a few methods. So method is the word for functions, essentially, in object-oriented programming, and in Java, you're always doing object-oriented programming. So first off, we've got this override instruction at the top there, which is essentially the same thing as extends. So override means that this onCreate method already exists, but we're just going to add some code to it. So we're not creating the onCreate method here, we're just adding some code to it. And then, again, I'm not going to go into detail, it's quite complex what that protected means there, but the void is quite useful. The void means that we're not returning any data in this method. So the onCreate method just runs and doesn't return anything. So some methods might, for example, you might have a method that does 2 plus 2 and that would return 4. But onCreate just does a load of code and it runs when the activity is created, i.e. when this screen is ready to go. So the onCreate method is where we're going to be writing pretty much all of our code today. Almost, not quite all of it. And then we've got a couple of variables passed to the onCreate method, which are essentially the bundle, so the state of the app itself, and then the saved instance state is the state of the app. And again, we're not going to be doing anything directly with those in this webinar. And then we've got our essentially create the screen that we've got. Again, we don't want to edit that. That's just a standard command which creates the layout and sets up all of the functions that we're going to add. And then we've got set the content view as well. So the content view is what the user can see, and we want them to see the R. So this is resources. We're going to be using this a bit later on, actually. So R is short for resources, dot layout is the layout folder, and then activity main refers to the activity main.xml. So this essentially links activity main.xml with the main activity that we're now editing. Then we've got a couple more methods down here that we're not actually going to have anything to do with. These are all about the menu at the top. So you can see we've got this default menu here, which currently just says settings. And if we wanted to do something when the settings is clicked, then we would edit this code here. Or if we wanted to change that menu, then we would edit that code there. But we're not going to be doing that in this webinar. We do, however, in the course. So if you want to know how to do that, it's all there in the course. All right, so that's what this code is doing. As I say, most of our code we're going to write in the onCreate method. All right, I'll just check for questions because I've covered quite a lot of stuff there. So Kerry says, after we have created an app in Xcode, is there an easy way to create the same app in Android Studio? Sadly not. No, I'm afraid not. There really is no easy way to go from Xcode to Android Studio. There are a few frameworks that you can use. So if you build your app with that particular framework, then you can jump to you can essentially convert your app from an iOS app to an Android app, but they're pretty flaky. And no, the short answer is if you want an Android app and an iOS app, you have to code them both from scratch, which isn't great. Unless you're making an HTML-based app, which have gone a little bit out of favor in recent years, but I still think they have potential. And you can create an app with HTML that you then bundle as an Android app or an iOS app, but they do tend to be a little bit slower. And they're limited in the functions of on the phone that they can use as well. So now, if you're creating apps in Xcode, sadly, you're then going to have to start from scratch for Android Studio. Please cover at some point how to download the app to your phone and also how to put it online for others to download. Yes, sure. We'll look at that in the next webinar, I think, when we get to the end of this one. Yeah, it's not too tricky. But yeah, we'll look at that. Thanks, Mike. Right, so we wanted to do something when the button was pressed. So that's now our main plan here. And we're going to do that by creating a method of our own, which we're then going to run when the button is pressed. So let's create our method. We do that by starting with whether the method is public or private, and usually I go for public. And our method is not going to return anything, so we write public void, and then whatever we want to call our method, so I'll call it click button, and it's going to be called by that button, and the button, just like in iOS, is a view. So anything that appears on the screen is a view. So it's going to be passed by a variable which has a type of view, and we can then call that variable whatever we like. So normally we go for view with a lowercase v, and then we're going to contain our code in curly brackets, and you can see it's picked up that we haven't included the view framework there. So I can use Alt and Enter to automatically add that. So just to reiterate there, we've got public void click button. So I've created the method click button, and this button is going to be, or this method is going to be called by a button, and a button is a view, and therefore it's going to be passed the variable little view by, and that's going to have a type, of view with a capital V. And this is a setup that we're going to see again and again in Java. I'll give you a quick example. To define a string, we use string and then the variable name string, and then we set it equal to something. So I think that clarifies a little bit what's going on there. So this means create a variable with a type of string. I'm going to call it my string, and then I'll set it equal to the string, I am a string. So here what we're essentially doing is we're creating the variable view with a little v, which has a type of view with a capital V, and this is going to be passed by the button which is clicked when the click button method is run. Okay, I'm not sure I explained that particularly well, so I'll just check for questions. Oh, okay. Carrie's getting advanced. I integrated Google Maps into my iOS app without using an API. When we publish our apps for iOS or Android, do we need to call the Google Maps API, or is it okay if we run Google Map just using the map framework without using an API key? It's completely up to you what level of integration you want. So if you just want to display an app on your map, then you can definitely do that without an API key. That's pretty straightforward. But if you want to show directions, for example, or put markers on your map, or have some user interaction with the map, then you need to do something a bit more advanced, and then you'll definitely need an API key for that. That is covered completely in the course, and I would recommend doing Google Maps that way. It gives you a lot more control, and it's more fluid within the app as well. So it's built into Android Studio. You saw there that we had the activity type at the beginning of Google Maps, so you can just add it, and it's covered in the course. So I definitely recommend doing it with an API key, doing it properly, as it were. Okay, so now we've got our click button function. We need to make sure that this click button function is activated when the button is clicked. So let's go back over to activity main and find our button. There it is, and we'll make sure it's selected, and then down here on the properties, if we scroll down, we'll see on click, and this allows us to state a method that we want to run when the button is clicked. So I want to run, I've forgotten already what I called it, click button. So we just put in there click button. Can we choose it? Oh, there we go. I can actually choose it from the drop-down menu. There we go. All right. So now we want to do something. So at the moment we've got it set up so that this method will run when the button is clicked, but obviously we won't know that it's run unless we actually get it to do something. So I'm going to log something, which means essentially pass a message to the logs. So I'm going to use log, and that will require me to import a log. I'm going to make sure I import the right one. So Alt Enter. And I definitely want the Android logs. So it's Android util.log, and that will bring the Android logs up. And then there are various different types of logs. I usually use log.i for information, but you can have error logs or other types of logs as well. And you can see that with the information log, we need to give two strings, a string which is a tag and the string which is a message. So the tag might be click button, and the message might be button clicked. And then at the end of every line of Java, we need the good old semicolon to show that the command ends. So you won't necessarily need both of these every time, but you have to put them there, so you might as well make something that makes sense. So I might use this to denote every log that comes from the click button method, and then this to give me a bit more information about what event has caused this log to happen. All right, so let's run that, and with any luck, we'll be able to click the button and get a response. That will take a few moments to run, so I'll just check for questions again. Nothing at the moment. Okay. Here we go. So don't worry, it's still running that first app. My first app still has the menu bar, interestingly enough. So here's my horrendous looking app, but this is the breakthrough moment. Click me. So nothing happened, but that's because I wasn't looking at the logs. Let's try it again. There we go. So you can see it there in the logs that the button was clicked. Hurrah! Very exciting. So now we've connected up the button with something happening in the code, which is your sort of main challenge really at the beginning of making an app. Now, what level do we want to go to now? I think the next level of interaction is we're going to add a text field for the user. So I'm going to get rid of this checkbox, get rid of the switch. I'm even going to get rid of the puppies, as lovely as they are. And I'm going to add a text field. So we're just going to have a plain text field there. And I'm going to stretch it out to be the whole width. And so what we want to do now is when the button is clicked, that we're not just logging that the button's been clicked, we're going to log the value of the text field. And then we're getting some real interaction between what the user is entering and what the app is doing. So the text field needs an ID. The default ID is just the type of field, which is edit text. I'll change that to my text field. There we go. So now I need to be able to refer to this somehow in my app Java. Here we go. So what we do is, firstly, remember that this was called an edit text. So the type of object there, or specifically the class, is an edit text. So just like I created my string, like that, I'm going to create an edit text. So I'm going to create an edit text. I'm going to call it my text field, although it could be called anything. And then I'm going to set that equal to, and this is where I'm going to try and find this text field. And I'm going to try and find it by its ID. And we do that using find view by ID. That kind of makes sense. So we're finding the view by its ID, and the ID is stored in resources. So do you remember we looked down here, we said resources.layout.activityMain meant resources, layout, and then activity main.xml, so the layout for that page. IDs are stored in resources as well, even though we can't see them in the folder here. So we get them by going r.id, and then if I start typing, there we go. There's my text field. Here we go. So we've created an edit text called my text field, and it's equal to the view by ID, and the ID is essentially my text field, but we've got that by searching within r.id.myTextField. Now notice we've got a nasty error there. That's not a problem. That's because on the left I've created an edit text, but on the right it's actually returning a view. So it's returning the more generic type of object, which that is. So I need to convert it to an edit text, and I do that by putting edit text in brackets in front of the find view by ID. So this find view by ID gets the view, but then I want to convert that to an edit text, and so that I can get the value of it, etc. All right. So now I can use the variable myTextField to refer to that particular text field. So the next thing that I want to do is get the value of that. So let's create a string, and I'll call it myTextField value, and that's going to be equal to, so we're going to take my text field and we're going to get the text. So there we go. We're going to get the text of it, but the text itself is not a string. It's what's known as an editable, which is a slightly different thing to a string. So we have to convert it to a string. And fortunately, Android Studio knows what I'm trying to do there, so I don't even have to type it out myself. So this gets my text field, gets the text from it in the form of an editable, and then converts that to a string. Okay, and now I'm just going to log it. So log.i, and then I'll keep click button as my tag, and I'll put my text field value as my actual message there. Right, so now we've got a bit of one-way interaction. The user can write something in the text field and click the button, and then when the button is clicked, the value of what they wrote in the text field should appear in the logs. Any questions while that's loading up? Nope, great. Here we go. So I'll just put hi and then click the button, and let's have a look in the logs. There we go. So the logs have got a handy feature actually that I can search. So I can search for click button, and then that will get rid of anything that doesn't say click button. So I can see everything in here, and you can see that it's got the value of what I wanted there. I can put some random text, and that will turn up. Wonderful. So I think we've just about got time to get a bit of interaction, two-way interaction. So we're going to show the user what they've done, what they've written, and we're going to do that using what's known as a toast. So a toast is a little kind of pop-up on the screen which shows it's used to show a little bit of text for a short period of time, and we make them like this. We call the toast method, and then we make text. So we're going to make some toast text, and then we need a context. I'm not actually going to use that for this toast. So where is this toast going to appear? We want it to appear within this app. So we use get application context, and then we give a string, and let's imagine that they've typed their name, and we'll give a string of hi plus whatever they've typed. And then we decide how long we want that to appear for. I'm going to change that from length short to length long, and then that last bit shows the toast. So now we should get a bit of two-way interaction that the user will enter their name, and when we click the button, it will say hi, and then whatever their name is. And I think that'll probably take us to the end of the webinar. So if you've got any questions remaining or any requests for next time, now's the time to mention them. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to put Rob in there and then click, and there it is. So you can see we've got this little bit of interaction there. Hi, Rob, and it just appears for a little bit of time and then vanishes. So what we're going to be doing next time is creating that app that I showed you at the beginning of the webinar. So a simple currency converter, which will use what we've got here, and it will take a number from the user and then convert that to a different currency and display it back. My guess is that will take about the first half of the webinar. So the second half is free to do things that you'd like to do. So I'll have a couple of ideas of things that I think would be a sensible next stage. But if there's anything in particular people want to cover, Mike has already requested putting the app on your phone, which I'll definitely show you how to do. It's tricky for me to completely show you because I can't show you my phone screen, but I can definitely explain the process at least and how to put it online. Essentially, you need to make an APK for others to be able to download, unless you want to go down the Google Play route, of course. So any other questions before I bring that to a close? George says, great first webinar. See you on the second. Excellent, George. Lovely to have you back. And Carrie says, if we make a multi-platform app, iOS and Android, and we use Parse on the back end, will the stored data such as logins data, yes, be accessible by both the iOS and Android apps? And will iOS and Android users be able to communicate? Absolutely, yes. So the whole point of platforms like Parse is that they are cross-platform. So you store your data on Parse, and then you can access it from any platform. So the obvious setup might be to have a website, a iOS app, and an Android app. And all of those three apps would be getting the data from Parse and using Parse to store the data and communicate. So that would keep all three of those platforms, web, iOS, and Android, live and using exactly the same data. So definitely that is the idea. I should say at this point that Parse has officially said that it's going to shut down in 2017, but Parse Server will live on, and they're open sourcing their software and allowing you to run it on your own servers. And there's a guide in the iOS course on how to set that up. So I think Parse Server is now a very good platform to use because you can host it yourself. So you get that extra bit of control. Thanks, Ivan. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one as well. Awesome. Thanks, Carrie. One more question from Carrie. Well, you can have many more questions if you like. Will any apps that we create now using Parse need to be migrated? Yes. So if you use the Parse system itself, then your app will literally stop working in January 2017. So you will need to migrate to Parse Server, stored on Heroku or wherever you want to store it. By that time, otherwise your app will simply break. But there is a guide to doing that in the course, as I say. All right, thanks, Nelson. Great to have you with us. So I will call it a day there. And yep, it's been great fun. Do let me know if there's anything that you'd like me to particularly cover next time. But otherwise, we'll do our currency converter app and a couple of things that Mike's requested and anything else I can think of that I think will be fun. It's been a pleasure. I will see you next time. Oh, no, one more question from Carrie. Oh, no, we've done that one. Brilliant. All right, take care then, guys. See you next time. Bye.